hopefully you can see some slides that say nurturing the designer and developer relationship. Great. But yeah, it's great to be here, and many thanks to all of you for attending today, especially over lunch. I know for myself, sometimes when people put meetings on my calendar over lunch and I haven't eaten yet, my belly's like rumbling and all that jazz, and I'm just like, oh, pain. But yeah, anyway, many thanks to Codebar for having me as well. And I do hope that your Codebar Festival so far has been an amazing experience. Today, I'll be talking about the ways in which we could potentially nurture and strengthen designer and developer relationships, at least from a designer's perspective. Also, I will say that this is an entirely safe space. No question is a silly question. As I said, like, feel free to pop them in the chat, and I've also left some time at the end to go through them. This is also a new experience for me too, because it's the first time for me presenting at a Code Bar festival. And it's also the first time that I've been using Figma slides to create a deck. So it might mean nothing to you, but it's basically like Google Slides, Apple Keynote, etc. So I'm hoping it goes swimmingly well. And if not, we shall learn and see together. So first things first, an obligatory agenda slide with some very, very, very high level topic areas that you can see here. But I aim to impart some knowledge, and hopefully it can be useful for you whether you are currently working, in between jobs, or haven't started working yet. So who am I? I'm Rob, senior UX designer working at a company called ICAS. In a nutshell, we are a global company that provides data and analytics for the petrochemicals and energy industries. Some of the largest companies in the world actually use our data, whether it is for pricing negotiations, forecasting, news analysis, just to name a few. But we're also part of RELX, which is a FTSE 15 company that has a number of different businesses that operate in a number of different industries. For example, one of them is called Elsevier. And if you've ever used Science Direct to access journals or other literature where maybe you were studying, this is a product that's owned by them. Or if you've ever been to Comic-Con, that is put on by another RELX business called Read Exhibitions. Or finally, if you've ever put a flight code into Google, it shows you the sources and where the data is coming from. So if you see the word Cirium, that is another business that is part of RELX. There are a number of other exciting and impactful businesses that are also part of RELX. I won't go into that today. That's not why you're here. But if you are interested, I can definitely share a link. So at ICAS, we work in an agile environment, which is a project management methodology that you may have heard of before. It's quite common in software development, kind of enabling teams to move faster in a constant cycle. This is in comparison to another project management methodology that you may have heard of before, which is called waterfall, which mainly involves delivering each item in phases, and one phase can't start until the previous one has finished. And it can be a lot slower between kind of like the initial requirements and like your end product. But there are definitely loads of pieces online about kind of the different project management methodologies out there and the pros and cons between them. For us, we also work in a tribes and squads model. And this is a model that was introduced by Spotify. So it essentially means that the technology function is broken down into smaller autonomous teams that are constructed similarly to this, where you've got a product manager, a business analyst, UX designer, back-end engineer, front-end engineer, a QA. But you also might see some squads where they might have a scrum master as well, and or a solutions architect. It just depends on the squad and what kind of their requirements might be. The beauty about this, though, is that you have a dedicated set of people that are able to have work assigned to them, move faster, and be able to cross collaborate between squads, but also between tribes as well. And for us, we do have a more detailed diagram than what you're seeing right now. But it actually lists out the different tribes and squads and the names and roles of each person, which then makes it really easy for someone looking at the diagram to know exactly who it is that they can reach out to for whatever reason. In our situation, we'd really love to have a designer embedded into every squad, but the number of dev squads really outweighs the number of designers that we have. And so there are some instances where we have a designer that ends up supporting multiple squads. The reason why I mention the whole tribes and squads model is because for some of you, it might be worth checking if something like this exists. So you know who to connect with, maybe find out who your fellow developers or designers are, because it might be the case that they have worked on something that you might need to reference, or perhaps a similar problem that you're currently looking at solving. They could even share some tidbits of information to help you out. So designers versus developers. You might be looking at this slide and wondering, how does this question help nurture a relationship? If anything, if we have this mindset, it might help to break a relationship. And so, if we break it down, in the blue corner, we have designers. And depending on the company, you could have a single designer, maybe if it's like a startup or a smaller organization. It could even be a larger organization that has finally invested in design. But this designer, not only does UX, but also does the UI and the research, and maybe as someone who's seen as more of a generalist. You could also have a design team that has maybe a dedicated research function where the two are collaborating together, but the researcher could lead maybe more of the discovery or whatever it might be, and maybe some of the other research activities. They might do all of the analysis, and then the designer will make updates as a result of user feedback. Or you could have the same as the previous example, but the designers are actually empowered to do and lead research, but also collaborate with the research function just to sense check for any biases or the approach, and so on. So with that in mind, imagine a designer working on this, fictional dashboard, and they've gone through a few rounds of user research, various iterations, feedback from peers and stakeholders, and then has given a handover to a development team. And once implemented, boom, they see that expectations aren't quite matching reality. Happy designer is sad. Maybe what they've noticed is that some of the row heights are different or the font weights are different. Maybe they have seen interactions or behaviors that have been introduced because of an external library that is being used and wasn't something that was initially specified. Perhaps there are buttons, colors, animations that aren't quite matching with what was originally specified, or they're simply just differences in the experience when looking at web browsers. For example, it might look amazing in Safari, and then horrible in Google Chrome. All in all, something probably hasn't gone quite right. Now, for dramatic effect, in the red corner, we have developers, and keep me honest here because it's not my forte. But you might have like full stack developers, front end developers, back end developers, DevOps engineers, and so on. And you might spend some time estimating how much effort something might take. You might be spending a lot of time attending stand-ups, sprint reviews, retros, planning sessions, roadmap sessions, basically all the sessions, just to understand, what are the requirements, what is it that is needed in order to get something over the line. And when it comes to maybe that designer developer handover and walking through a solution, perhaps questions begin to pop up. If a user clicks this button, what happens next? What is the next interaction? What happens if we can't fetch the data in a timely manner? Do we then need to surface something to a user? Have you considered that? Or what about this use case? What about that use case? What about this edge case? What about that edge case? Have you considered all of that? Why not? And depending on what you're planning as a designer to do, it could also have an impact on the implementation and delivery timelines. This might take X number of sprints. All in all, there could then be some back and forth, and the designer might become frustrated, the developer might become frustrated. There are more tickets and tasks to complete in order to get parity between design and development. And with that being said, maybe there is a potential feeling of, oh wow, maybe it is us against them. And is that the way that we should be thinking? Does it have to be like that? What about if we approach it like this, designers and developers? It shouldn't be an us versus them, but we should be looking at it in a way of how we can get the best out of each other and deliver together. Because ultimately, we are on the same team and we want to deliver the best possible experience for our end users. So how might we get there? first tip, and actually these aren't in any particular order, but I suppose they are in terms of the slide show, is really get involved with user research. It sounds simple enough, but what do I kind of mean by that? Um, as part of the design process, we will conduct research, and depending on what the project is or what the research objectives are, and what the research activities or methods it is that we might want to use, could also present you with the opportunity to get involved. One common, I suppose, research method is usability testing, and this usually comprises of a facilitator and then also a participant. Um, and the facilitator is maybe guiding the participant through an experience of things that maybe the team wants to test. But we also might want to choose to include observers. And these might be people who have an interest in the project, or they could also assist with note taking. And maybe after a session has been completed, we might also debrief on what has been heard and observed. So one thing I would say is potentially consider reaching out to your researchers and or designers to see if you do have the ability to actually get involved with user research. Not only will it help you strengthen relationships within your team, it will also help you to get a real understanding of, okay, who is it that you're actually building for? Can you develop empathy for these users? Can you get into the mindset of these people? You really get firsthand experience of what are their pain points, what are their immediate needs. Could you uncover some latent needs as well? What is it that they are appearing to struggle with? What is it that they might like or dislike about an experience? And during a session, you might even notice ways of actually improving parts of an experience. So, for example, if there is an ongoing usability session and you kind of notice that perhaps the page load is slow, or parts of the product are inaccessible. These are things that overall impact the overall experience, and so there might be ways that you could suggest things that could be improved. What could also provide even greater impact is that if you notice developments or suggestions from the business going in an opposite direction to perhaps what the users are saying, by being equipped with insights from research, you can then also challenge or channel the voice of the customer, and suggest an alternative approach, or at least highlight the impact that a change could have. But what about if you don't have time? And I do recognize that in business, time is money. And actually, one of the most expensive resources, especially when it comes to building software, are actually development teams. And so, with that being said, if you don't have the time or the opportunity to sit and observe research sessions, you could also consider an alternative approach where you actually aim to get access to research insights. So, if you're lucky and they are stored in like a research repository, or even if they're stored in like Word docs or slide decks, getting access to these again can help provide a bit more context and understanding of what the users are thinking and feeling. And yeah, of course, if that doesn't work, you could also ask for meeting notes. I think these days, Microsoft Teams, I think with Copilot, can provide like summaries of meetings. And that could also help kind of maybe shortcut a way of understanding what it is that has happened in some of these sessions. Next tip is around joining design critiques. And you might be thinking, aren't design critiques just for designers? Isn't it in the name, design crit? The thing is, they don't have to be limited to just the design team. At least for us, it's a space where, yes, typically the design team comes together, that is UX, UI, user researchers, so that we can share designs, so that we can get feedback, so that we can get direction and alignment. But we actually haven't shied away from allowing other teams to join. In the past, we've had members of our editorial teams join. We've had product managers join. We've had front-end developers join as well. And the reason why this is actually beneficial is that sometimes we found that it can be quicker for a developer to mock up an interaction in code than it can be for a designer to illustrate a behavior. And that can be due to limitations of the design software that they're using. It could also be due to maybe some complex logic that would actually just take so much longer within a prototype. And we've actually found that really, really beneficial. And it just kind of shortens that almost like design to delivery, design to developer like handover because they've already been part of those conversations. They've heard some of the feedback. Maybe they're trying different ideas. And yeah, it really helps to understand whether something is feasible, or if it isn't, and how something might be built. It can also help us to, I suppose, identify problems sooner. What some of the constraints might be, whether it's an avenue that we should be going down, because it might end up being very costly or complex. And perhaps there are better ways to achieve a similar outcome that would still satisfy the requirements, at least based on what we've heard from user feedback as well. The next one is around considering reusability. And by that, I mean designing and developing reusable components that can be used and shared across your products and services. Why is this? Why might it be important? Well, having consistency across your experience will reduce the likelihood of users having a fragmented experience, which could then lead to them feeling frustrated, overwhelmed about kind of what to expect. Like, I interact with a button here and it looks like this, and then I come to somewhere else and it looks different, and the interactions are totally different. It could also have an impact on things like NPS scores, and so on. So, um, by having reusable components, these can then live within a UI kit, or in a design system. And in that way, there is kind of like a single source of truth for people to refer back to. It then means that all of the decision making that led to a component being defined doesn't necessarily need to be redone. So then it enables you to move forward quickly, save time, ultimately save money, and just enable teams to, share a lot quicker as well. What I will say is that just because a component is built and then put into like a UI kit, or a design system, doesn't necessarily mean that the work stops. Like, it might still need to be maintained as patterns and standards evolve over time. So that's just something to bear in mind. And I suppose also sometimes the initial um, challenge to set up something like a UI kit or set up a design system might also need business buy-in, as well. And it might be the case that they don't immediately see the benefit. But yeah, if there is a way that you can share and reuse components, yeah, definitely advocate for that. But sometimes things don't always go to plan. And I do have a story for this. So let's take a simple download component that has been through the product development lifecycle. It became apparent that this was a feature that was important to users and would help support them with the various tasks that perhaps maybe sit outside of the product that they use. Again, similar to the dashboard example that I showed before, this has gone through user research, gone through iterations, handed over, everyone's happy, decisions on the interactions are defined. Great. Handover's amazing. And so what we thought was happening was that the intention was that the first squad who picked up the work on the component would complete all of the work and make sure that it was then put into the UI kit so that other squads, should they need it in future, basically all the work is done. And you can see how this would be really efficient, because if a change is made to the component that kind of exists within the UI kit, let's say updating the layout or color, or font, then any squad that is referencing that component would essentially get all of those changes for free without necessarily needing to create their own version or think about how to manage it, which sounds amazing. Um, in reality, this is what was happening. When it came to the second squad, who then realized that they needed to include some kind of download functionality in their work stream, instead of using what was already developed, they created their own instance. And then squad three did the same thing. And you can kind of see like where this is going. And we were shocked. We were like, how could this have happened? And it seemed like such a small feature. And when it does get relatively good use from users, again, it's not the best experience. And when I was mentioning earlier around having that kind of consistent experience and not necessarily something fragmented, like this was just defying all of that logic. And you can see like they're all slight variations to the component, all developed by different squads at different times. And so for us, it meant a number of things. One is around the time that was spent developing the component, by each squad. Instead of referencing what was first built, meant that time was lost on this task, which could have been used and spent on other tasks. And of course, as I said before, like time equates to money. And so, um, one of the most expensive resources are development resources. And so if we're not optimizing and using them in the right way, then yeah, it's definitely not the best thing. One of the other interesting things about what happened and what we uncovered is throughout all of this, the designed component never changed, yet each implementation was very different. And so when we did some more digging, we were able to uncover that it was just a breakdown in communication and some misalignment. There were assumptions being made that the first component that was developed by the first squad was being used in all of the other implementations, and we believe that those conversations between the squads was happening, but actually it wasn't. And this was like some of the early stages of getting the design system set up and the ways of working. For us, again, it was another way of looking at it is just because, as designers, maybe we have a reusable component in Figma. Um, if even if that's communicated to a development squad, we might also need to ensure that they have all the appropriate documentation. And so we're making the links between squads, especially if they're working on the same feature. So if we know that squad one has done this and squad two are picking it up and there's a designer embedded in that squad or a designer supporting that squad, making sure that those conversations are happening would definitely have helped avoid all of this. But yeah, as I mentioned before, like sometimes, things don't go to plan, and that's okay. The main thing is that we are able to learn from it and understand why something went wrong and what happened, and sh ensure that we kind of put processes and practices in place to make sure that, a mistake or error like this doesn't happen again in future. The next one is around being an advocate for accessibility. And why do I say that? I say that because now more so than ever, it's becoming even more important to ensure that products and services are accessible. It's about being inclusive. It's about also some legal implications depending on where in the world you are. I know for sure in the US, it's a legal requirement. In the EU, there are some directives that are coming as well this year, I believe. So yeah, it's really important that we are being accessible. It's about ensuring that people that may, for example, have, let's say, a visual impairment, a hearing impairment, a physical impairment, all of which could be, temporary, situational, or permanent. Looking at ways in which we are able to help support them and be able to allow them to access the products and services. Um, so one example of an accessibility feature is closed captions, and hopefully Codebar doesn't mind. I've taken a recent upload from their YouTube channel. But the reason why this feature is interesting is because it might help someone, or how might it help someone? If you're someone who has a hearing impairment, this feature really helps to ensure that they can enjoy an experience by being able to read what someone is saying in a video, or if music or sounds are playing, they're able to read and interpret and understand kind of what's going on. I know that in some streaming services, they also differentiate different speakers by using different colors. They also describe sounds that are playing. I think on Netflix, it's like tense music sounds are playing, or things like that. And so that's really, really helpful. And I've often seen it as well, maybe on Instagram, if you're out in public and you don't necessarily have like your headphones, and maybe you want to watch a story. Sometimes people do put, let's say, captions or subtitles, and you're able to like understand what's going on in a video, in a reel. Um, these days, it actually gets even better because the closed captions also support automatic translations, which again makes a video even more accessible to many others. And let's say, for example, I've been trying to learn Japanese and I was interested in practicing my reading skills. I could, let's say, switch the closed captions to Japanese, and boom, I can then test myself on how much I'm able to understand, probably with the audio muted, otherwise it doesn't necessarily make any sense. But yeah, this is just one example of looking at ways that we can make a product and service more accessible. The previous example kind of focuses on those that might have had a hearing impairment, but here's another example of how we can better support others. So Definitely don't want to name and shame anyone for having an inaccessible product. So here is a fictional car sales site that was generated using AI prompts in Figma, which yeah, I'm having really a lot of fun playing with recently. But yeah, let's take this fictional site. So for someone that might not have a visual impairment, it might be easier for you to kind of distinguish the different colors of the cars, where you've got, let's say, the silver Tesla and the two red cars. But then also, if you look on the bottom right hand corner, we have filters which relate to the colors as well. So if we then apply some visual impairment filters, if you did, let's say, have, for example, protanopia, which affects someone from being able to see the color red, it's evident from this image how your experience of a product or service can change massively. Like the difference between the two is stark. Suddenly the filters don't necessarily make that much sense anymore. Like we've just got color, but we don't necessarily describe what that color is. The red is now looking kind of greeny, olivey, yeah, mustardy. So a service or experience can really uh, be different depending on, who you are and how you might experience it. On screen are some aspects that we should be taking into consideration. Closed captions, as I mentioned before, color contrast, language, making it as clear as possible. And yeah, there are definitely many, many more. But one thing again, I will say is that, we won't be young forever. We will get older eventually, and we will also want, people to take into consideration accessibility, so that we, by the time we get there, can also be supported and are able to use some of these services. There are many tools and plugins out there to kind of help simulate different impairments, so to speak, and even help with a better understanding of assistive technology as well. There are also a few libraries and frameworks out there that do help by having accessibility baked in. I know that React, I think, has some accessibility support baked in there. There are some web browsers as well that help support understanding just how a product or service is performing. I'm not a Google Chrome power user, I'm like a Safari power user, but I believe in Chrome they do have Google Lighthouse. And that kind of gives you an accessibility report in terms of, yeah, there are some criteria and that it's not perfect, but it does help give an indication of how your product or service is performing. Microsoft also have some great resources around accessibility. I mentioned before about, you might have, um, I suppose it's broken down to kind of like three types. You might have something that's permanent, maybe something that's temporary, or something that's situational. And I think the examples that they give is like you might have broken your arm, and that is temporary. You might have maybe lost a limb, and that's more permanent. Or you might be on like holding something whilst interacting with another product, which again could be more situational. So for this, in terms of, the designers and developers working together, it's kind of important to ensure that accessibility is included as part of the process and not just an afterthought. And I think if both of the designers and developers can make that connection, then it becomes a lot easier to then, make the case with product managers and maybe some of other people within business as well, just because sometimes accessibility isn't necessarily a priority and it can be an afterthought. And, sometimes some people can't necessarily see the benefit. The next one is about implementing design QA, or at least considering it. And for those that don't know what QA means, it stands for quality assurance. And on screen, we've got an example taken online of a Kanban board. And for those that don't know, Kanban boards are used to help easily visualize tasks. And we work at ICS in 2 week sprints. And as a task is worked on, it kind of moves through the swim lane, and like each column denotes what stage in the process it is. And depending on where you work, sometimes the column names can be structured differently. There might be more columns, there might be fewer columns. But within, I suppose, each task or ticket, so to speak, there are various things to symbolize importance. So, how long has a ticket been in a certain status? Who is the ticket assigned to? What priority does it have? Does it have an epic associated with it? How many days has it been within a column? I believe as well. And as you can see, between kind of like the ready for review and ready to release, there is a column for in QA. And this is where usually functionality testing occurs, whether manual or automated, and then once complete, it'll then move to ready to release, and eventually it's released. It's a simple process, and it does make sense. However, uh, if there are instances where the implementation hasn't been reviewed against the designs, let's say in like a dev environment or a staging environment, then it requires potentially creating separate tickets if something was then released. Um, so an alternative approach to help reduce the number of additional UI tickets in future is just bringing the designers involved and bringing them into view a lot quicker. And so if between kind of like the ready for review and the in QA columns, we introduce a process of design QA, this would then allow designers to conduct design QA before a ticket is then handed over to the QA testers. And as mentioned before, like it could really help reduce any UI tickets going forwards, but also reduce any, design and tech debt and capturing all of the differences and realigning the two, I suppose, designers and developers much earlier. And perhaps it's something that you could potentially think about as part of your process. Of course, we don't necessarily want to create bottlenecks. So it might be the case that maybe as a developer is working on a ticket, perhaps before they put it into ready for review, maybe they get the designer to look into it, or maybe after ready for review, they get the designer to look into it and just be like, okay, yeah, I can see, the design here and the, what's been implemented here, and does this align? Does it make sense? Just so that everyone's happy. Which brings me to my next point: communicate. It's pretty much like life 101, right? Like we communicate all the time. But what about over communicating? Like, yes, if communication is life 101, if you were to over communicate in your personal life, it could potentially be a burden. But maybe in your professional life, not so much. And why is that? Communication sounds simple, and sometimes it's not necessarily what you say, but how you say it. Uh, and also, it can be maybe not saying anything at all is also saying something. But you would be surprised as to what can be left to interpretation if something hasn't been properly communicated. And so, if you are experiencing handover sessions between designers and developers, and something doesn't necessarily feel right, or you feel that something's missing, question your designers about, missing behaviors or flows. It can really help, especially if you're trying to understand something, especially if like you're trying to estimate a story or how much time a task is going to take. Yeah, I'd say it's really, really valuable. Like if you also notice that people are asking the same questions or others are asking the same questions too repeatedly, again, consider whether it's something that needs to be documented somewhere so that people can refer back to it in future. Um, and if there is also a better way of solving a problem, and it would improve usability, suggest it. Maybe it's something that has already been considered before, and perhaps you weren't part of the conversation, or maybe it hasn't been considered, and it's an avenue that could be explored. But to be honest, like you should be a part of the process so that nothing comes as a surprise during handovers. I feel like it should be gone other days where, everything kind of happens in a silo and then it gets to developers and it's like throwing something over the wall. I don't think it should be like that, at least anymore. Like, you should have already been involved as part of or engaged as part of a project kickoff, maybe through some research and maybe the rest of the design process so you can kind of understand what's going on. And if it happens to be a new relationship with maybe a new designer or a new team, or even if it's an existing one, think about establishing ways of working and identify what works best. Is it more documentation? Is it annotations and comments in design files? Is it, having Confluence pages that the whole team has access to? Is it references or instances of where something has been implemented before or has been tried and tested? Because ultimately, yeah, we just want to, get the best out of everyone. And finally, might sound simple, but just get to know each other. I think if you're based in the same location, make the effort to meet in person if you can. Maybe have lunch together, maybe consider having a team social with your squad, or your designers or developers or however your team setup is. If you're not based in the same location, for sure it might take a bit more effort, but I'm sure you can find ways in which you can connect on a much deeper level, simply just to get to know each other. There might be things that you have in common. But yeah, really look at ways of building that psychological safety within your teams. When people feel psychologically safe, they can feel confident to raise problems, suggest ideas, and this may help strengthen your working relationship, but also break down any potential barriers that could be. So yeah, to summarize, these are the tips that we've been through today. I'm sure there are definitely many, many more that you might even have yourself or that you've worked on. But yeah, at the end of the day, we are on the same side. We should be working to provide the best experiences for the people using our products and services. And as I mentioned earlier, it should never be an us versus them. It should be together we can. So yeah, thank you for listening. And yeah, if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to take those.
Okay, first questions come in. Uh, Thanks, Rob. This has been great. How do you manage advocating for accessibility as a lone many hats designer with lots of responsibilities that aren't all UX?
That's a great question. It's about looking at, I suppose, the things that are the quick wins, so to speak. So I suppose typically people might start with is, does typography make sense? And are our colors accessible? But then it is, as I mentioned before, it is so much more than that. And I think if you can find ways to get some allies on board, it can be the case of, if you have a good relationship with, maybe it is a front end developer or even a product manager, being able to try and get maybe one or two tickets each sprint, or every couple of sprints that do focus on accessibility, and like those small enhancements can definitely make an improvement going forwards. But yeah, it is difficult, especially when you're working between many different things. It's just trying to either carve out that time or being able to push back in certain aspects and saying that, we should make a case for accessibility, maybe having a dedicated, a time boxed uh, project just to deliver on maybe some of the quicker things, and then think about maybe a longer term strategy, something that I've seen work in the past. Um, or just try and even simulate experiences where, your product perhaps isn't accessible and trying to maybe get some of the stakeholders to interact and see how they experience it. And sometimes that can also be a way of being like, okay, I can see here that, the blue isn't really blue or the red isn't really red, or, I've tried to just use a keyboard and actually I can't use this. Think of it, yeah, it's about thinking about how you might communicate that. So hopefully that answers your question.
Perfect, thank you. I know sometimes when I was I don't develop as much now because I do codebar, but I know when I was developing a lot, for me it was like a non-negotiable. Like I wouldn't even like add it as like an extra ticket. I would just add it as part of that ticket of like, okay, well I'm building out this feature. It needs this, and this, and I would just like make sure that it was done as part of it. Like it was yeah, it was almost like a non-negotiable of like, well, if you don't want it done, ask another developer. But I'm not going to build this like not accessible for people.
Yeah.
um, yeah, if you have any other questions, please do. Lots of people saying thank you, which is lovely.
Thanks for listening. Yeah, I remember like back at uni, we were I study product design, and we were, trying to think about ways in which we could make our products more inclusive. And I remember we were actually fortunate enough to get gloves that simulated the effects of arthritis. And so as you start like moving your hands and stuff, you can really feel how painful an experience is. And so we were able to use that to be like, okay, maybe, a door handle should be, much bigger or whatever the product was. But yeah, we have seen that, being able to use, let's say, the um some of the simulators around like visual impairments and things like that have also helped. I do know that I think if you work in the public sector, I think there used to be a government lab that you could request access to join, and then you could like, actually test your product on some different assistive devices and technologies. I think Google has one as well, but yeah, I think you have to be working in the public sector in order to access those.
Perfect. Okay, well, I don't think. Oh, how did you move from product design to a more IT role?
Great question. So, um, I suppose it was we were quite fortunate at uni. But when I joined, the course was more tailored towards, I suppose, physical products, but they changed the course structure in my second year, so that it kind of followed a more, I suppose, more like the design process that I have today, where you're kind of doing research, you're ideating, you're testing, developing, etc., and then you have a final solution at the end. I then worked at a few startups and then joined the company that I'm at today and have been there ever since. There's definitely like a lot of good resources out there that have really helped. But the design process, yeah, is the way of thinking is similar. So that I suppose helps. And I think there are other adjacent industries that do help with some transferable skills. So yeah, that's how I made the transition.
Nice, thank you. Any other questions? Give it a few seconds.
Yeah, no problem. But yeah, I didn't necessarily put my LinkedIn here. But yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. It's at Robert Otim. Yeah, if you have any other questions.
We'll
Uh,
make sure to share your LinkedIn in the video description when we upload it to YouTube.
okay, cool.
Okay, perfect. Well, I will wrap things up. Thank you so much, Rob, for coming and sharing your knowledge and wisdom. Lots to think about, and hopefully, people found this very useful as well. I know I did. And thank you so much to everyone else for coming along. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully, see you at another Cobalt Festival event this week.
Awesome. Thank you so much.